as we will continue our conversation on the topic of data. This time, however, we will approach it from a different angle and talk about the impact of a fully interconnected world on the security of entire nation states and governments on the one hand, but also what it means for every single human being when it comes to the topic of identity.
Ladies and gentlemen, please give a warm welcome to our panelists. That's David Meza sitting here on stage. Then we say hello to the Director of Cybersecurity at Microsoft, Mrs. Michele Myauo. The CEO of Kapsch BusinessCom, Mr. Jochen Borenich. And the CDO of UNIQA Insurances, Mr. Alexander Bockelmann. The session is moderated by Christoph Keller, who is leading the area of business development at the Telegraph in London.
Well, thank you very much, everyone, for joining this very, very important panel on security. And David, you've just been talking at length about data and fantastic ways of making data more visual and being able to use it. We're now going to be sort of shifting the conversation a little bit more towards how can we protect data. And one of the most important questions there is to decide what data do we actually need to protect in the first place, right? And for a lot of people in this room, data protection is not going to be one of the biggest things on their agendas, but I think one of the things we're going to be unpacking with the panel is why it should be. So let's start with that first question, David. How do you at NASA decide what is worth protecting and what isn't worth protecting?
That's a very good question. So again, it goes back to the strategy of what we're looking at and how we're going to identify our data. And as we look at data, we got to figure out, first of all, what's critical to us? What do we need that's proprietary, that we want to make sure we secure for years to come? The Apollo data, as I mentioned earlier, that was critical to us. We utilized it almost 50 years after the fact for something different. So it was critical for us to understand that that was something we needed to keep and protect and store and not only not lose it, but not let it get out there because it was sensitive information for how we develop a type of a system. The second thing, of course, is we've got policies and regulations of different types of criteria we have to follow for different types of data. We've got to make sure we follow those regulations across our industries, and I'm sure governments have different types of regulations. But it really is a labor of love to a degree, because you do have to go through all of your data to understand what's there, what's important, what do you think you're going to utilize not only in the next week but in the next several years, and then what's important to you as an organization that helps protect your organization stay viable, and if it were to get lost, would it be harmful to you? You've got to think about those types of questions.
Very good. And Jochen, you are the CEO of Kapsch, one of the biggest companies in Austria, and you have many clients out there who are concerned about data security, and you help them navigate that. How do you help them sort of decide for themselves what is worth protecting and what isn't?
I mean, if you look at the last year, we've seen an increase on security attacks of 40%. So there's a massive increase, and it all depends on the type of companies. There's no one-size-fits-all answer, because what we are doing with our customers, we're doing a so-called business impact analysis to see what kind of data is sensitive and should be protected. This could be business data. This could also be machine data, because when we talk about cybersecurity, we're not talking just about installing a firewall for the office IT environment. We are also talking about the so-called OT, the operational technology. Just look at the manufacturing shop floor where more machines are connected, and this is also an entry point nowadays. So it depends on the industry, it depends on the type of company, but nevertheless, a 40% increase is worth of having a close look on this. Yeah?
So, I mean, there's a saying that dollars speak more loudly than words do. So let's just have a look at the money for a second, David. I mean, how important is data security to NASA? In terms of your IT budget, just in as a proportion, how much money are you spending?
It's extremely important to us. It's one of the things that we focus on quite heavily within our budget. So I would I would guess, just under 40% of our budget is related to IT security in one way, shape, or form, whether it's perimeter or whether we're looking at actually protecting the data itself, to making sure the inadvertent release of any type of data does not harm the organization.
Is that what other companies are spending out there as well, Michele, in terms of your work that you do with Microsoft and your corporate customers? Are they spending close to 40% of their IT budget on cybersecurity?
They tend to spend a lot, and it depends on, if you go proactively prior to breach, then what you can do is you can focus on those proactive measures, so that way you don't have the harmful effects to not only your bottom line, but to your reputation and to consumer confidence. We often see that after a breach, consumer confidence goes down, stock prices go down. So really it's kind of an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. And when we respond to attacks, it's a multi-vendor approach. We're not in there alone. There's multiple vendors that are there helping to clean up their assets and what they're strong on. So it really is a community approach.
So basically the notion that preventing data breaches in the first place and being aware of it is actually going to be a lot cheaper for a company than it will be down the line.
Yes, all up.
Yeah. Now, Alexander, you're the Chief Digital Officer for one of Austria's biggest insurance companies. How do you go about insuring those kinds of risks? Do you have an insurance product for companies that insures the risk of data breach?
Yes, because nowadays we live in a digital world. And with the digital world, we have one more existential risk than we had about 50 years ago. We had storm, we had fire, we had other existential topics. Nowadays, IT is very inherent in all of our services and our daily lives. And also on the corporate side, it's one of the key resources to be successful nowadays. And you need to think in your security and your business strategy what your risk appetite is. And unfortunately, we see that there are a lot of people that are very interested in a lot of the information that you have, either personally or as a company. In Austria, the latest report said that from KPMG that about 61% of companies reported a successful external breach, meaning a cybersecurity event. And therefore, you need to also think about how to protect against that, either with an insurance and partnership model that we also recommend very much, because you need then, in the case of an event, you need very fast access to an expert team that helps you identify what the problem is, helps you with the remediation, helps you with regulatory affairs. You have certain conditions that you need to meet from the reporting side, and also that helps with public relations, because you need to inform your customer, you need to inform basically the public. And for most companies doing it on their own, with their own expertise, they are overwhelmed, especially in this stressful situation. And for that, we would recommend to prepare for that, because the likelihood to get a breach at some point is just increasing with time. And you need to basically make an assessment how you want to manage that.
So it sounds like very much like an agreement with Michele, actually, that there is this great need to prepare. So the question that begs itself is what to prepare for. Jochen, what are the most important, or the most common breaches that you see?
Of course, you're right. There's the need to prepare. But if you look at the facts at the moment, on average in Europe, the IT spendings of a company is 3%. Depends on the industry and so on.
So let's just contrast that. 3%
is the
of the IT
revenue
budget.
3% of the total revenue of the company is the other IT spendings.
Is the IT spending.
And out of this 3%, again, 3% is the average for IT security.
Wow.
So if you multiply it, it's 0.1% of the revenue of a company. This is the average spendings on IT security at the moment.
So companies out there, 3% of their IT budget versus around 40% of NASA. So there's a huge gap there. And why?
So the facts are that the companies on average in Europe spend 0.1% on security.
Is that enough?
And if you now see the threats, that are possible, we don't have to talk about Sony and so on. You can talk about things that you can read every day in the newspaper and hear on the radio. What's happening, million or even sometimes billion damages. I'm not talking about reputation damage. You can look at the effect on the market cap and so on. It's clear that it's not enough. This is also the reason why we see this huge increase now in spendings on IT security to cope with the speed and also speed of digitalization that we have at the moment. Because if you now, of course, follow the path of digitalization, you should also, in the same speed, upgrade your security mechanism. But it's not just about firewalling and systems. If you look also at the figures, 21% of all breaches are caused by humans, in the sense of social engineering, which is the largest door for hackers to enter a company, are still humans. So it's about awareness, about processes, about training, not just about systems that need to be upgraded.
So the sense of we have not only breaches that are there or possible because the systems aren't safe enough, but actually because the people using the systems aren't aware enough. David, what do you do at NASA in order to make sure that people are aware of the data threats out there, and to create sort of a culture in your organization of making sure people are doing the right thing?
Sure. So, of course, part of our budget, of course, goes on training and education to our end users of how different types of attacks are transpired, how we may get affected by them, different phishing attacks or other type of social engineering. All of our users have to go through a yearly training in order to actually be on the network. So if they don't do the training within that year's time, they will actually be cut off the network until they've taken the training to understand and keep up to date with the latest techniques that hackers may be using to try to gather information.
And just building on what the others have said, at Microsoft our philosophy is that we don't, it's not if you'll be attacked, but it's when. And that's not in a negative connotation, but that means if you know something's going to happen, you should plan for it. So building on what the others say, we talk about making cybersecurity part of your corporate strategy, and that it's not a project for IT or the CISO to do. It is a eat your vegetables exercise every day, and really ingrain it into your strategic plan. Have your CEO talk about it, commit to it, commit the spend through your CFO. Talk about human resources. How much are we going to hire in cybersecurity professionals? How much are we going to outsource and work with other service providers? And then contracting and legal. How do we make that all happen? And one kind of key piece of information that we follow a lot in the U.S. is publicly available, not Microsoft, but it's the NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology Cybersecurity Framework. And what's really cool about that is you can go and access it right on the internet. It's developed by academia, industry, and government in a partnership. And it's a high-level approach, right? Just if you're overwhelmed and you have inertia and you don't know how to get started, just go take a look.
So I just want to pick up on one thing you mentioned, that cybersecurity should be a cornerstone of a corporate strategy. I just want to ask our audience here, please raise your hand if you're aware of your company's cybersecurity strategy. Okay. What, do you think that's a good number? Do you think that's...
I'll take what I can get. That's excellent. Good job. Good job. Definitely. But no, you see those hands raised. Go talk to those folks. See what they're doing, and share information, because the hackers share information.
So I want to drill into a little bit more about what companies can actually do in order to be a little bit more cyber secure. Jochen, you mentioned just now, creating a good culture, making sure that the behaviors are right. What else can companies do to be more cyber secure? And often, we don't only have big companies that have huge budgets to spend on this. A lot of companies are small, and they can't just afford to hire a huge cybersecurity team. So what are the recommendations that you give your customers?
Again, first thing is to do the necessary awareness training for every employee. Second thing is to keep the systems upgraded, to do patching, to keep it standardized as possible. And third, what we, but also other companies are offering is so-called cyber defense centers. Mm-hmm. So we have a 7/24 possibility to monitor the network traffic, for instance, and then to avoid that hackers enter into your environment. Just to give you some figures, what we are dealing with about 500,000 attacks a day for our customers. Wow. So it would be impossible for a small and medium business company to deal with this large amount, and more. These are not just personal hackers from outside. These are more and more also machine learning algorithms that have to deal with. Yeah, and it's more and more a question of having an algorithm against an algorithm.
Yeah.
So the amount will increase, and it's quite easy because the resources are available also for hackers. You can just order something like a security attack service. Yeah, you can just book resources and start a denial of service attack for almost zero. It's so cheap to buy computing powers. And also the algorithms are available to start huge attacks. And therefore, it will be more and more difficult, this is the answer to your question, for small and medium business companies to cope with it alone. Mm-hmm. So try to find the right partners also on the market. Yeah.
I believe it's a maturity curve. So it felt, in the beginning it feels always overwhelming because there's so much dynamic in that space. But if you start with the basics, if you create the awareness, if you do the hardening of your basic software, if you keep it up to date, if you basically build your own network and share information with peers and relevant organizations, then you build also an internal competency without basically investing $1 billion into it. But you need to do that first, from my point of view, before you buy fancy new tools that potentially promise a certain level of security that your basic foundational IT capability does not yet have. So I think you need to mature very quickly through a couple of steps to get a basic component, and then also manage essentially your complete risk strategy. And I believe that at the end of the day, it's advisable to build also an approach for the day that might come that you get a security breach. Who's the task force? Who are the partners? Who's basically organizing that you build for that you have an action plan. And I think then you can also be very optimistic in a digital world. It always feels as if cybersecurity is seen as something bad and only bad things can happen. We also need to say that it is possible to have very value-adding services that you can provide to your customers in a secure way, and it's not all just bad out there.
Yeah. That's a great point, talking about the opportunity, and I want to pick up on that, because of course not everyone has to spend as much as NASA has to on data security, because of course, David, for you, it is incredibly important that because most of your data is really sensitive, I would imagine, it's important to make sure that you prevent breach most of the time. But Michele, how does Microsoft help their customers be more cyber secure and also in a cost-effective way, and sort of sell that as a positive opportunity into the market?
Definitely. So we focus on a lot of the things that everybody else here has talked about. First, patch and upgrade. You don't want to drive a 1920s car on the Autobahn, right? It's like you don't have the latest airbags, right? It could be bad. So what you want to do is do some preventative measures. So patch and upgrade. And then the other thing we talk about is really identifying that key data that is core to your business and protecting it, protecting the crown jewels, we say, and following a need-to-know posture. So, for example, not to get too technical, but the domain administrator credential, that is the keys to the kingdom, per se, right? Once you have that, you have the servers, applications, all the workstations. So we see in a lot of attacks in these large organizations that stuff's not sexy, it's not fun to do, right? It's architectural debt and identities and data classification, right? So what we do is we focus on, okay, you have 100 domain administrators. Let's calm that down to 1 or 2 globally, and let's give those folks the keys of the kingdom, and then let's give them just-in-time access to do that. They don't have to administer the domain 24/7, 365, so make that credential available, a few hours a week. And Microsoft offers a very good solution, and it's available. You can look, past the hash white paper 1 and 2 if you're looking for a resource. Or there's other companies that offer similar solutions, right? So I don't know if you're a saleswoman here, but so that's kind of what we look at. That's it's a 99% of the attacks that we respond to.
So if I understand you correctly, basically what you're saying is you're assuming a breach.
We do.
And it's then to say, well, what do you do how do you protect yourself against that breach? How do you sort of almost manage that at the individual level, sort of in terms of access rights and those kinds of things?
Yes, because just by one way of example, just to make it a little real, we had a large corporation, and there's intelligence gathering that goes on. So these attackers had done some intelligence gathering on an executive admin, and she was getting married, and that woman had clicked on a coupon for a bridal dress, and what ended up happening was, because that person had the domain administrator credential, the attacker then owned the whole environment. Wow. And they could delete, destroy data. So it's, you know, preventing the damage once the attackers get in.
I want to shift the question a little bit towards the second half of our question that we've been given by the Darwin Circle today, which is to talk a little bit about identity and how the sense of identity is developing in the digital space. Alex, you obviously as an insurer, you insure multiple identities, I suppose. You insure companies, you insure private individuals. How do you as an insurer basically define identity in the digital age?
I think the opportunity that we have is when we get a seamless identity management concept in the space, we can have barrier-free services across industries, and you need it as an enabler for the ecosystem economy that we discussed earlier today. We saw WeChat, etc., and other examples where the identity is shared between different service providers. And how do you do that? We have there an idea or a vision. We work together with Raiffeisen and some other partners here in Austria to the idea of a digital identity as like an onion model. You have a governmental issued digital identity that some countries already issue, and around that you might be able in the future to have a customer controlled identity layer that allows for verifiable claims. What I mean by that is you can basically gather confirmation of certain characteristics. For example, do I have a minimum salary level to afford a rent? It should not be higher than X% of my income. If you basically do that in a model where you have a network of companies that certify these claims, that are trusted, that you as a person can manage and decide when to share with different service providers, your digital life might become much more seamless and less cumbersome. Nowadays, you go into a bank, you go through a complex KYC process, you open a bank account, you go next door, you want, I don't know, get a mandatory car insurance, you need to go through the same process again. So what about if we would have a trusted, secure way of gathering that information, putting it into the hand of the consumer, and allowing the consumer to share those pieces of information in a transparent way? That would basically give a boost to digital service systems.
You raise a really interesting point there, because most of our personal data is actually scattered around the internet in an incredibly fragmented way. Some of it's up to date, some of it isn't up to date, some of it is held by Facebook in terms of our likes, and some of it's held by Instagram, and some of it's held by Google. It sort of begs that question of, well, what are the components of our data that are actually incredibly personal to us, and that we should, and the question is, who owns that data? David, you're our data expert. What's your sense of, is there a type of personal data that should become the 31st human right, as in that is owned by you and not by the company who holds it?
That is a very interesting question, and I guess you can have many long debates over that. But my stance, and I guess my personal stance, of course, if it's your own personal identifiable information, that you have the right to that. That is your information, and it should not be shared inappropriately or without your knowledge. And we do a great job of that at NASA, as well as any of our agencies, that we want to make sure that any data that's out there, we protect where it moves. It cannot be moved from one organization to another or outside the organization without your knowledge. And we have very strict guidelines for types of information that, when combined, could actually become identifiable information that hackers could utilize. So we have to understand how that works. And that's, again, all part of the education. What type of information can be shared when you combine my name with my birthday? Those two things separately may not identify me, but those two things together you definitely can identify it. So an email sent out that gets hacked with, say, "Happy birthday, David," and here's on your birth date, can easily lead to hackers getting information that could be vital to them to be able to break through or breach our system.
We've sort of come back to one of these words that has been mentioned a few times on this panel now, which is this sense of education, and education being a key part of a cybersecurity strategy. David, what does NASA do as probably the best in class, given how much you spend on it, to make sure that your guys are
We're constantly looking and reviewing our education to make sure that it's up to date and people understand the latest types of threats that are out there. And we believe that cybersecurity is everybody's responsibility. Michele mentioned that it's not just the CISO's responsibility. It belongs to everybody. We all have to make sure that we don't accidentally give away the keys to the kingdom. So from an educational standpoint, we're constantly revising, we're constantly developing new educational systems, and of course we want to make sure that our IT specialists who actually work in that field are constantly well trained to help us along the way too.
So we've debated a lot about what companies can do in terms of the importance of the culture. We've spoken about making sure that the right spend is in place, the right technologies are in place. I just want to sort of reflect a little bit, because we started the day today with a panel on Europe as a crossroads technologically. And I think the same sort of question applies really to this panel as well. And this is a question for you, Jochen. As a company in the heart of Europe, how well is Europe set up really to be able to, A, deal with the threats of cybersecurity, but also at the same time capitalize on the great opportunities that are out there?
I mean, in total, I mean, it's always now in the face of seeing the chances, the opportunities, and the risks. If you see the risk and what happened in the last years, we have to be honest, there's some key technologies are not present anymore in Europe. Look at technologies like networks. Look at the big network companies. You can find them in the US, like Cisco. You can find them in China, like Huawei. We have no comparable company in Europe. And this is now, from my perspective, a very important moment to think about cybersecurity. You can see a lot of big players again in the US. You can see big players in Israel. And it's now up to us, also in Europe, to develop more and more this topic. And if you look how this works in other countries, look at Israel, look at the US, it's always an ecosystem. And ecosystems where interests of the government, or state-owned companies, corporate startups work together on a certain topic. And if you look at Europe, we are extremely fragmented. Not working on the same type of topics, not defining key technologies. Of course, we have Horizon initiatives and things like this, and we try to make the best out of it. But to have a common strategy, which are our key technologies, and from my perspective, cybersecurity should be one key technology. We should try to do everything to bring together our capabilities and develop this competence.
From a data point of view, building on that, I think from a cultural aspect, Europe has a different way of approaching privacy. And I think that is one of the strengths of the European market, that you have a common ground to build on. If you can leverage that, then I think Europe has a very good opportunity to build trusted services, to allow people to have a better, longer and safer life, also not only in the analog world, but also in the digital world. I think that the trust factor is extremely important. And I think that cultural heritage, there is a big opportunity for European players to leverage that heritage, that trust, to build competitive models in a way that people actively choose them, maybe compared to other areas, because they are not so sure that the same principles go into the solution and into that service as it might come out of a European-driven one. So that's why I think there is a huge opportunity. The challenge on the other side is you always have a value triangle in most topics that you basically look at, and you always need to balance how to do that. And if you think about compliance with such an idea. If you think about security in general for the data flow and the information and the customer convenience, you can have the most secure version that's potentially also very compliant with any regulation that is applicable, but is unusable because you cannot access your own information because it's so complicated and it takes so long. So you always need to balance the different components to also create customer value in the end. But in a nutshell, what I want to say is I think as Europeans, we have a big opportunity on that trust dimension. And I think we can leverage that. I think we have very innovative companies also in the security space. If you look also to Vienna, we have a new startup accelerator called WeAccelerate. The startup that won the jury prize in the first batch was actually a cybersecurity company with a honey trap technology. Once you are breached, that you basically keep the intrusion in an area that is designed for that and pretends to be real data. So we have the tools, we have the people, we just need to leverage on our strength, and I think then Europe has a strong part to play.
So there are a couple. So this was a bit of a few great opinions here. So we've got an observation that Europe is too fragmented. There isn't potentially quite as much funding going into cybersecurity as in other parts of the world right now. And Alex, you talked a lot about the great opportunities. So what are the barriers that are keeping us in Europe from capitalizing more on these great opportunities? Is it a question of we don't have enough people who are skilled in this area? Is it a question of not enough awareness? What's holding us back?
Maybe, if I may, one topic that you have not mentioned, we are currently not looking at Europe as a single market. So if you think about the big players that are in the technology space, they often grew organically, but they also have a lot of merger and acquisitions. In Europe, we always look at, from a regulatory point of view, we don't want monopolists, but we don't look at the European market with 700 million users, as Thomas basically showed us. We look at each individual small country-level market. And how will you then create basically a global player if you are not allowed to reach basically a critical size in even a single European market? So apart from all the topics that you're basically, that you pointed us at, I think that is also a dimension that we need to look at Europe. If we want to play European, we also need to look at the digital market as a single market, and then also create players that have the strength to compete on a global scale.
Yeah. So we need to make sure that we this was picking up on your point, Jochen, of a fragment, being far too fragmented here in Europe, and think a little bit more holistically across Europe and build some larger players. What sort of other barrier do you observe with your companies that you work with?
I mean, the main 2 points. One is the fragmented situation. The second is the funding, the single market. I mean, we have to look also what is the threat if you're not doing it. Yeah, often pressure is a high motivation to do something. Yeah, and if you look at the threat, we have on the one side threat in the way of industrial spying. We've heard in the first round of the panel that we're still in Europe is still very important in the sense of manufacturing and B2B and so on. So we have the threat that industrial spying will weaken this position. We have also the threat, and everybody can read it in the newspaper, that opinions in the social media, opinions and influencing is happening, so that even elections can be to some extent influenced. So we see there's a threat and there's a pressure from my perspective to do something against it. And often a pressure is the best motivation and the best starting point. So it's, from my perspective, the funding. We should try to focus, to define key technologies. Cybersecurity is, from my perspective, one of the most important key technology, and to create a single digital market, also to offer to the corporates and to the startups the right environment to sell those.
Michele, from your perspective, just very quickly, because we're on our last minute, so keep it as brief as you can. What from looking at Europe from the US, what do you think the European companies these European regulators can learn from the US?
I think we have a tremendous opportunity because, for example, at Microsoft, we're a global company. So we work with our peers in Asia and in the European Union and in the Middle East. And we work as a comprehensive cybersecurity team, although we're focused in our various areas. So for example, GDPR, we're learning from our peers in Europe on how to deploy those offerings in the US, Latin America, and Canada as preventative measures. And conversely, when we were working on pass-to-hash mitigations, we shared with our peers in India and Asia and Germany, and they help make the offerings a lot better. So as we deliver these offerings globally, we see kind of the uniqueness across. However, we also see the commonality, and that's really the opportunity, I think.
Thank you very, very much. That was fantastic, fantastic final remark. Let me just quickly summarize. We learned today that a lot of companies in the world are not taking cybersecurity as seriously as they should do. So if you're going back into your own companies tomorrow, next week, make sure that you talk to your guys about developing a cybersecurity strategy. We learned today that it doesn't need to cost that much money, actually. If you prevent, it'll definitely cost you a lot less than if you suffer a breach. It's not only a question of tech, it is also a question of culture and embracing the right behaviors. So it doesn't always have to cost so much money, and Microsoft and other companies out there offer great cloud solutions as well to help you along the way. Thank you very, very much, panelists, for your fantastic contributions.
Thank you.